Hey everybody. So most of y'all probably already know me, but my name is Vicky Roberts, and I'm one of the archaeologists here, and I'm also one of the outreach coordinators. Um, and so today the topic is we're going to be talking about the Shumla Scholars program, which if you were here earlier, you heard Susan talk about how great it is for the kids here at Comstock ISD to get to participate in, and I'll talk, a little bit more about it as the presentation gets started. So let me go ahead and bring up my PowerPoint and I'll share my screen. This is a program that we've been doing for close to about 8 years now. We started in the spring of 2014. And it's a way for specifically the high school science class at Comstock ISD and Shumla to kind of interact and expose the kids to some like high school, not high school, but like a science program. And so I'm one of the instructors, and also Dr. Steelman is also one of the co-instructors, as well as the high school science teacher, Miss Timms. Bless you. And so in collaboration with Comstock ISD, basically it was a program designed to create opportunities for students to participate in scientific research, and it's scientific research that's going on right now. And so year to year, not all the kids were part of the same projects. It was just kind of what we were doing at the time and kind of what we could kind of fold them into to get them that sort of experience. It also gave the kids a chance to essentially receive mentoring from us and a sort of professional growth as we were kind of talking with the kids. We didn't necessarily lecture the whole time. It was a lot of hands-on things, projects, and essentially we gave them these problems and they were problem solving, explaining to us what they wanted to do, what they thought they should do. And we were there to sort of just kind of guide them through the whole thing. So for the most part, the kids did the majority of the work. And so in addition to that, so they would work either in the radiocarbon lab with Dr. Steelman, or we'd also take them out on field trips to go see archaeological sites, since we are an archaeological research and education center. And so we definitely played into our strength of, we're working here locally in this region. We taught them about what was going on here in this region historically and prehistorically. And because most of these kids grow up not really getting to learn what's so special and specifically special about this region that they're growing up in. We took them to different ranches, and a lot of the landowners were really super supportive of the program that we were doing and allowing us to go out onto their properties and just kind of let the kids explore and let us basically use the rock shelters and the archaeology as an outdoor classroom, which definitely got the kids way more engaged because one, they were outside, they weren't in a classroom, and two, they could actually physically see and experience those things in those places. So the field trips were always the kids' favorite part. And so we'd take them to private ranches. We'd also take them to the state park. And so here the kids are laying down right there in Fate Bell. Most of you have probably been to Fate Bell. And we were going to be sitting there for a while. So I just went ahead and lay down, and a lot of the kids just kind of mimicked me. And it was really actually a nice way for us to kind of talk about the panel, discuss the rock art, talk about what we were seeing, observing, and kind of how all that fed into what we had been teaching them and what they had been learning about that whole year. So for almost every class, since especially I'm professionally an archaeologist, I taught them a lot about kind of the local archaeology and essentially what archaeology and anthropology is, because that's not something that typically gets taught in schools. And so we went over basic concepts like sort of the overview of the regional archaeology here. So we'd give them PowerPoint presentations with photos and things of artifacts, a lot of stuff that y'all have actually seen us do in other lunch and learns that just kind of give you an overview of what it makes this area so special. We talked about basic concepts in archaeology that would be important for them to understand, like context and why context is so important, why we archaeologists really look for things in place that helps us understand what those artifacts and those features are trying to tell us. Stratigraphy, how things are layered, and so especially for the rock art, we focus more on the paint layering, not necessarily the deposits in the ground, but it's still that same concept of things being layered on top of each other, and how to tell what is older, what's younger, and why that's important. Um, we taught them basically the differences between what an artifact is, what a feature is, what eco facts are, and try to make them more uh, basically explain it in a different way and not just give them like cold textbook examples. And so I would ask them, okay, I described what an artifact is. It's something somebody made at some point, and it's something typically you can carry around with you. So using that definition, what are some modern day things that you would consider an artifact? And so I have them basically I ask them a bunch of questions and they have to answer me essentially. And that's also a really good way, especially in the very beginning when kids don't really want to talk and interact and they're not really sure what the class is about, is to kind of just break that ice and get them excited to participate. Um, because it's just, in the very beginning of class, you're still feeling things out, and it tends to warm the kids up to us and what we're about and what the class is about. We also talk about fundamentals of mapping. I've taught different classes how to use a compass, how to measure their pacing. So we'll bring out like a tape measure and I'll literally have them walk across. And so that's also a good way to incorporate some math into it, because you have to do a little bit of converting. They didn't like that part of it so much, but when they saw that it had a practical purpose, I think most of them kind of understood why they were doing those sorts of conversions. So we tried to incorporate a bunch of different activities for the kids to do. And especially because we are still working and during the day. So, we spend about 45 minutes to about an hour with the kids, usually 2 to 4 times a week. Um, and then in case we have to be gone for, say, field work, or we have other obligations and things, we can at least give them activities and give them other things to do while we're not there. And then we just, whenever we meet up again, we discuss whatever it is that they did. Um, and then we move on with any other kind of sort of concept. So we talk about mapping and things like that, sketch mapping. They've made maps. We talked about the importances of having scales and north arrows, and talked about why all that's important. And so definitely different things they wouldn't have thought about or considered until, maybe they got to college or even after college, or if they were working just professionally in whatever trade they decided to do. We talked about a little bit of experimental archaeology, and I'll show you some pictures. And experimental archaeology basically is just essentially recreating or doing a certain activity to kind of understand how those artifacts or how those features are formed, and it helps us better understand how those things accumulate. And so one of the biggest features out here is earth ovens. And so one year we had a class create an earth oven and go through the whole process of picking the plants, like this student is here on the PowerPoint slide. He was very excited about it. Basically going out, harvesting the plants, digging the holes, gathering materials, and all these things, so that they could then understand how much work goes into just doing one of these, and the fact that we see these all over the place, and some of these are just accumulations of thousands of years, is how really common and how much effort that would have taken in that. So it was a good way for them to actually participate in the archaeology. And we also had our colleagues and partners from like the Texas Historical Commission, especially, come out and talk to the kids about not necessarily just archaeology, but also just generally about what it is that they do, what they specialize in, and kind of showing them different tools and things that they use, like a ground penetrating radar. We had someone come out and talk to them about using drones for archaeology, and making maps and things with them. And so just basically exposing them to other people and other tools and technologies that they wouldn't have maybe considered was part of what we do in our research or in other people's scientific research. We did for a while have them read articles and things. So things that we published, we would give them the article, and then maybe week by week we'd go through a certain section. Since it is they are journal articles, so they're really dense, and some of the language is a little bit difficult, but we at least walked them through it. We had them read a section, had them write questions for us, and basically made them really kind of break the articles apart and really think about what it is being talked about, and if it made sense to them, why not, what was hard to grasp, and then we just kind of went through that process, kind of like a college seminar class, essentially. Um, but we went outside, we did plant identification things. I talked about the earth oven building. One class even went out and recorded rock art with us for their project. We did the field trips, and we did a whole bunch of other things that we could think of that really just to get the kids out of the classroom, or kind of see science in a different way. It's not just that subject that they have to get a book for and learn formulas and things in school. They're applying those concepts and things to science and actually having real scientists interact with them and then participate in those things. I think really impacts the kids in a real positive way. And I'll talk a lot more about that kind of towards the end of the presentation. Um, and so one of the biggest resources that we used with the kids was a website called Texas Beyond History. If you're not familiar with this website, I highly recommend that you check it out. I use it all the time. As a professional archaeologist, I know lots of other professionals in Texas also use this website, but it's a really good way, especially if you're not familiar with certain regions, or if you want to know more about a particular region that you're interested in. There's a lot of information about the cultural heritage of Texas for those regions. And there's an especially good section for the Lower Pecos Canyon lands, which is where we are and where Comstock ISD is. TexasBeyondHistory.net. I can't recommend it enough. It's an awesome website. And so here's a listing basically of the different kind of class projects we did. So in addition to the kind of classwork and the smaller activities we do in the classroom, the kids also participated in a kind of longer term project. Some of these projects extended across the different classes. Others we did kind of just for that one class, because it just kind of fit with what we were doing that year. And so for the first few years, we worked a lot in the Comstock Cemetery here. And then the kids also built a greenhouse to kind of help with other projects that one of the classes at the school was doing, in terms of growing plants and things like that. So that they could have a controlled space where they could grow these plants and kind of do those sorts of experiments. And then pretty much since the start of the Alexandria project, which was back in 2017, the kids spent a lot more time with Dr. Steelman, who does a lot of the radiocarbon stuff here at Shumla. And so the last several years, they've been kind of doing projects related to the radiocarbon lab, helping her set up the lab itself. Back in the old offices when we were in the two houses, if some of you remember that. And then when we moved up here to the large office up by the highway, and then resetting up the lab here at the main office. And so for the rest of this presentation, I just have a lot of pictures of the kids engaging in these different projects. So the first one I'll talk about is the greenhouse. And so what I didn't mention before is that the science teacher at the time who helped us start this project was then high school science teacher, Dr. Phil Daring, who is now our science director, not our science director, our archaeology director here at Shumla. So you can see him there in the upper right, talking to the kids, showing them the plans and things for the greenhouse itself. And they did a lot of the work there. They laid out the gravel, they flattened it, they made sure it was level before they started laying the structures and things down. And then they were filling in the gaps as time went on. They even wore hard hats if the day called for it. And so we wouldn't always give them the tools to use. We had the adults on site there. And so we did a lot of the kind of the tool usage there, but for the most part, they shoveled and leveled things, and they were able to get the greenhouse set up and used in one of the other science classes that Dr. Phil was that he was teaching, and I can't remember the name of the class right now, but they did use it for several years until he retired from the school. Unfortunately, we were talking about earlier before we started the recording, we've been having a lot of high winds lately here in Comstock, and the the greenhouse actually blew away. So it is no longer there. But it had been up there for close to 8 years. So that's really impressive. And the kids had something physically there that they could say that they were a part of. One of the bigger projects we did is several of the classes worked at the Comstock Cemetery, where the kids learned about different kinds of concepts. We taught them basic photography skills so that they could take pictures of the gravestones. And essentially, what we tried to do was to get the kids involved, taking an inventory of who was there at the cemetery, kind of getting a sense of maybe where the oldest part of the cemetery was versus where the new part of the cemetery is. We even had Tiffany Osborne, who you can see there on the right. She's the one in the hat. She works for the Texas Historical Commission, and she does a lot of ground penetrating radar. And so she came out at least a couple of times, showed the kids the GPR, explained to them kind of what it does, why people use it, and kind of what its strengths are versus what its weaknesses are. And so then she gave the kids each kind of a turn to basically use the thing. She described it as basically like you're pushing a stroller with this big radar machine on the bottom there. Tiffany was also nice enough to process that data that she took. She actually collected data, and she was able to kind of point out some anomalies in the cemetery where there weren't any grave markers, but it suggested that it had been disturbed, so potentially there were some unmarked graves that we didn't even know about before. So that was pretty cool for the kids to kind of talk to her, interact with her, and see her doing those sorts of things. Part of that project was also they filled out paperwork and things to get the cemetery registered as a historic Texas cemetery. The Comstock Cemetery met several criteria for that, especially in age. And so that was one of the reasons why they needed to go inventory the gravestones, was because we needed to see just how far back, what the oldest graves were, so that we could get a sense for how long the cemetery has been in use. And so this is a picture of one of the later classes presenting a lot of that work that they had been doing and what their previous classmates had done to the Texas Historical Commission. We had two representatives from the cemetery division come out, and they wanted to see what the kids were up to. And they, I've been interacting with them for a couple of years at that point. So they wanted to see what they've been up to, and kind of, they were really excited to see that the kids were engaged in this kind of community project. And even a lot of community members were very excited that they were doing something like this for the town. So it gave them, they made the presentations themselves, they practiced with us, and then we invited the Texas Historical Commission folks to come out and come listen to the presentation. And so ultimately, in the end, they did get it registered as a historic Texas cemetery in 2017 after a few years of work. So they got there's a little plaque for it. And then we also had this, what's the word I'm looking for, certificate, and this letter kind of detailing that. So that was really cool for them to be able to continue that work and then see it through to the end. One class got a chance to come with us, and we recorded a rock art site called the Tinaja site. Some of you might be familiar with it. And just kind of, we didn't go out and do field work all the time. We took them out a few times, and then for the most part, they did a lot of the lab work with us. But they helped us collect the photos. We taught them about the types of things we need, so the kinds of photos we need, putting scales in the photos. And so they were essentially our interns while we went out, photographed a lot of these figures. And then we went back, and they essentially helped us do a lot of the work. They wrote descriptions for these figures. When we were out doing other things, they could do that at school or whenever they had time, or when they came to the office with us. And don't worry, on that bottom left photo, he's not touching the rock art. He was just putting his hand up to kind of see how his hand matched up to the other hands on there. And so the kids really had a good time. And actually, the student there on the right, who's looking at the drawing tablet, ended up picking up a lot of that photography knowledge and is now doing photography professionally. He really enjoyed that aspect of it, I guess. And so his parents still live here in town. So every once in a while he'll pop by and he'll come and chat and tell us about all the different stuff that he's been photographing. And he had an Instagram page for a while, and he was really good. I was really impressed with it. And then as the Alexandria project started, the archaeologists were less available, but we had Dr. Steelman here. And so she was able to put them to work, helping her set up the new part of the lab. And so for the last 3 or 4 classes, they've been kind of participating in doing that, and kind of helping her not necessarily run samples, but potentially running standards and things that she needed to do in order to clean out the chambers and stuff for her to be able to run the samples. But also kind of set up the lab. They helped her name the different chambers now. And so they got instructed on how exactly they needed to do it, why they needed to do it in a certain way in order to kind of make sure everything inside was clean and sterile. And they got busy. They really did a good job. They were supervised, obviously, but essentially they assembled most of it. And so you can see them here just putting it together, and they actually had a really good time. Other things that they would do with Dr. Steelman is she also does a lot of spectroscopy things, and so she'll sometimes borrow a PX or a portable X-ray fluorescence device. So you can see the student on the left there kind of using it, and she's kind of walking them through it, talking about what spectroscopy is at a real, fundamental basic level, what it is, why we're using it, what it's telling us, and how it helps our research. And so this particular class also helped her process some samples that she had gotten from Argentina. And so they were going through the different steps. She walked them through it. They helped her do conversions and things before anything got scraped and prepared. They weighed things. And so they really got to experience what it is that Karen does in her lab as her little lab partners there, her lab helpers. And then like I talked about earlier, we took them on any chance we could. We took them outside because the best way to see the rock art and kind of get an understanding for the archaeology and things like that, and just the history of the entire region, is to go see it where it is. And the kids loved being outside. They got to explore and, walk on boulders and help each other up and down the canyons and things. And just got to play with stuff. And so we didn't tell this particular student what that was on his finger. We just put it in his hand, and we told him to wait for all of his classmates to gather around. And then we told him to squish it, because what he has in his hand on his finger is cochineal. And so when you squish it, it turns that bright red color, and he was not expecting that. So it was really funny to let them see that and experience that in a safe and a controlled way, but also just to talk about how that it's essentially a cactus fungus, if you don't know what cochineal is, but they used it for red dye. And for a while, it was more valuable than silver was. And so they were shipping this from the New World back to the Old World to use as red dye. So the red coat's red coat was red because of cochineal, or at least it made it more red. And so it's just a fungus on a cactus. So they thought that was really cool. Other things we did is they went through paint making. And so they harvested bone marrow from deer legs and things like that, mixed it with soap and pigment and water and things. And we had them just basically play with the recipe. We didn't tell them how to mix it. We told them to figure it out. And so to figure out what the best way to do it was. And so we just let them get messy with the ingredients, and they made paint and things, and eventually painted on some of these rocks. They different kind of motifs and things. We just asked them, paint whatever is important to you. How would you symbolize that? Just paint something for us and then tell us about it. And so that's what they did. They made their own paint and then painted some designs on some rocks that they went to go get, and then later presented those ideas and things to us with those paint. Taught them how to use a compass. And I knew as soon as I picked up this compass and I looked at the readings that everything was going to be backwards. So the girls right there next to me are reconverting everything that they had done for the last 2 days. Because when it originally started, I was facing into the building. So once we got everything fixed and everything, they basically sent me on a path. I just told them, give me a set of directions, and I challenge you to basically set up a scavenger hunt for me, uh, using everything that we had taught them. So we taught them how to measure their pacing, how to convert that into distance. And then we had to take those distances and turn them into my steps. And then basically they were leading me around the school using different landmarks on the landscape, how I taught them using the compass, to get to whatever destination it was that we were going. And so I challenged them to do it, and they really enjoyed that. They liked that I said that I dare you to make this as hard as possible for me. And they did a really good job. I walked pretty much around the entire school. I have a lot of pictures of this. The kids one year built an earth oven. I love earth ovens. Um, and so they shoveled, they harvested all of the plant materials. And obviously this goes with plant ID and things like that. We went outside, we talked about the different plants, their uses. And so in particular, we talked a lot about sotol and lechugia, because that's what was likely getting cooked the most in these earth ovens. And so we went out, we harvested some of these things, and we baked them in an earth oven. And so you can see on the left is a picture of an unfired sotol, and on the picture on the right is after a couple days of cooking in the ground, and it turns that nice kind of roasted color, and they smell real sweet, kind of like roasted sugar, like caramel, molasses even, and they have a very distinct flavor. The kids started the fire themselves, so we taught them about friction fire kits. And we use sotol basically as the hearth board and as the spindle for it. We taught them how to make those, how they worked, and let the kids try to light the fire as best as they could. And eventually they got it. It takes a little effort. It's a lot harder than people realize. And so, but they were super excited to get the chance to, one, start a fire, but two, to be able to kind of understand and learn this new skill. And so you can see the student there tending to the ember, trying to make it grow so that we can light the earth oven there that you see built up, and burn it down so that we can get the plants cooking. They all had to taste it, and it's just part of the process. And the best way to describe it is if it's kind of like a soapy, sugary taste. It's not super appealing when I describe it that way. It's an acquired taste. And pretty much most people's reaction is the face of their teacher here. It's not quite the best, but if that's what you had, you made it work. You eat it very similarly to like an artichoke. You just kind of put the leaf in your mouth, you chew it up, you get all the kind of leafy, the kind of mushy parts out, and then you spit out the fibrous material. And so a lot of times, just sitting on the surface, we'll find those kind of chewed up fibery bits. We call them quids, and they're just spit out and just laying on the surface, and they could be several hundred years old to several thousand years old, just sitting on the surface. And so this is the bit of experimental archaeology, showing them, like we would take them to Fayetteville, where they could see the effects of doing this for thousands of years, where they're continually cooking and baking, and there's all those rocks all over the place because they're all brought in as part of the process to make the earth oven, and also how those fibery materials got there and why they look the way that they do is because they have been chewing them up and spitting them back out. The program's gotten a lot of recognition. In 2018, the school district had been honored as a district of distinction, specifically because of this program, where we introduced them to creating 3D models and other technologies. So like with the cemetery project, several of the students, one of their personal projects was they made a 3D model of different headstones. We let them choose a headstone. We had taught them the specific way to do the 3D modeling. And so they went out, we supervised them, collected the photos, and then we helped them run the models in order to create a finished piece. And so several of the kids got involved with the GIS, the Geographic Information Systems. And so, and also using a total data station, kind of like that survey equipment. If you've ever driven on the road and you see the guy kind of looking through a piece, and then there's somebody else maybe on the other end holding like a little mirror. Um, and I have another picture of that later on. We use those kinds of tools to help map the cemetery, and then they then use the GIS to visualize that data onto a map. And so yeah, in the upper left, you can see we're holding up a tarp so that the student can get even light for their 3D model. Up on the upper right, there, everyone looking up at the sky, he's holding a remote control because he's flying a drone, and he's flying a drone up over the cemetery. They didn't do the photography for the cemetery. We had our colleague do that, but they got the chance to experience flying the drone, and he coached them through it and basically talked about using drone for archaeological purposes or research purposes in general. Down on the bottom left is that total data station I was talking about, where they're looking through the piece, looking at a specific target, and they're taking points all across the cemetery. And then the bottom right there, all the students, and the woman in the middle with the gray hair is actually one of the main caretakers for the cemetery. She came out and listened to Tiffany Osborne talk about the GPR, and so they're kind of looking at how the data is being visualized on there, and it's really hard to read. If you don't know what you're looking at, it's just a bunch of squiggly lines, but Tiffany's really great, and she was able to kind of point out things and kind of help interpret that data while we were there. A lot of you may already know this, but we were also featured in the Texas Co-op Power article. And here's a great picture of the kids at Fate Bell Shelter with Dr. Steelman. This article was published, I think, just last year. And it basically just kind of talks about how the kids come out with us and we take them to sometimes rock art sites and things like that, just, situation depending, to talk about the local, the regional stuff, and basically try to make it more real and more attainable. I don't know what the right word I'm looking for is, but basically just make it to where it's not just cold abstract learning in the classroom, but letting them actually be involved in it and actually see it in place. And that overall has been the best part about this, is actually getting to interact with the kids and actually take them to these places. And so I've been telling some people kind of ahead of me doing this presentation, but I run into a lot of the students a lot, and even I run into people in Del Rio who were, when we did the education programs for the 4th and 5th graders, they always talk about those experiences. A lot of them are in their mid-20s now who did the 4th and 5th grade programs, 10 or so more years ago. And it's always left kind of this impression on them about how much fun they had kind of engaging in doing those things, getting to be outside, and really getting to just kind of have fun. Several of the students have gone on to college. One of them actually just applied for a PhD program either at UCLA or UT Austin for psychology. One is doing photography. One, I think, just took their teacher certification, but is, I think, in process of getting their master's degree. She got her bachelor's degree, I think, in anthropology, archaeology because of this. And she actually interned with us one summer at the very beginning of the Alexandria project. Several of them have gone on to the military. One of them was working basically in submarines, which is really hard to get into, but he's doing essentially kind of nuclear type research, which is really cool. He's a very smart kid. So it's really cool to kind of run into the kids and talk to them and catch up and kind of talk about the old days. But they always bring this up. And every once in a while we have to take them to the local bar, Judge Roy Bean's place in Langtree. Just to let them see, it's not just about the pre-contact stuff, but it's also the historical aspect, and that might be something that they're more comfortable with, something that they are have an easier time kind of understanding and engaging with because it's more recent, and it also might directly affect their families at that point. But overall, it's just a lot of this is just basically has been showing the kids that science can be fun, it can be engaging, and that there's a lot of really cool stuff here in their own backyard. And some of these kids can't wait to leave. And I always had a hard time explaining to those kids that I willingly moved here from Central Texas. I moved out here to do what we're doing now. And so that kind of blows their minds. And then just throughout the year, they kind of get more of a sense of why, and they better understand that kind of statement. And part of one of their other field trips that they also usually do is they'll go to the Whitty Museum, and they'll go see the people of the Pecos exhibit. Since we helped out a lot with that, we provided them the images that you see that get kind of projected onto that screen, and even in the rock art lab where they did interviews and things with us doing the research. They go and they see that, especially now that they have a better understanding of what's here, why is this important, what makes it special, and then they can see it now in San Antonio in this really beautiful exhibit. And then, while they're there at the museum, they go see other things. So these are examples of Wuchou yarn paintings that, maybe those kids probably wouldn't have known anything about until they started kind of hanging out with us, taking the class, and getting exposed and experiencing those types of things. And so a lot of it is, it can be hard to kind of get that level of exposure to different cultures and things in such a small rural place. And so I've really enjoyed all the time that I've spent with each and every class, and I hope that they continue to go out and be curious about things and ask questions. And yeah, I hope they really enjoyed it. So thanks, y'all. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have about the program. I'll go ahead and I'll stop sharing this so that we can see everybody's faces. But yeah, if y'all have any questions, I've got answers. Seeing the kids and which kids get interested in which aspects of things, and kind of Dr. Steelman and I kind of tweak the program every year, because every kid is different, every class is different. They're not interested in all the same things, and so as we learn about them, we kind of cater the program more towards them so that they'd be more interested in it. So they might do some of the same activities and things, but they won't necessarily get it taught in the same way, if that makes sense.
I just want to say, I think it's invaluable what you're providing for them with their hands-on learning, and inspiring them to go on and do related careers. It's just wonderful, Vicky.
Thank you. Yeah, we think so too.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I was a docent at the ITC at the Whitty for 10 years, and this was great.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I did.
Other questions for Vicky? It kind of speaks for itself, doesn't it? This program, I mean, it's such a great partnership. It's such an important part of our mission. And Vicky and her husband Jared, when he worked with us, and Karen, and so many others, our volunteers, our interns get involved. Everybody just really, really enjoys this part of our job.
It's really fun. They come up to the office and we get to chit chat with them. Dr. Steelman just took them out recently when we were doing some research out at Fate Bell Shelter, and we were doing some microscopy work using the microscope. So they got to go out and go talk to them and hang out, and kind of get to see it in action, which was really cool. In action, in the place.
Yeah.
It had all the scaffolding set up and everything. And I really appreciate every one of you that came or even just registered for this, because it really shows us that you care about the rock art adjacent things that we do. This isn't directly tied to our research, but also in a way it kind of is, because it's also a way for us to do public outreach in that sense.
Mm-hmm. And maybe someday these will become our next researchers, these kids.
Yeah. Yeah, I talked about the one who was actually an intern for us one summer.
That's right.
So
yeah.
It does happen.
Comes back around.
Mm-hmm.
Well, awesome. Well, if everybody is satisfied and you've gotten your questions answered, we can give you back 15 minutes of your day.
Thanks for joining us, y'all.